And we'll start
Perfect.
laughing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Vikki.
Hi.
So, how did your journey in ecology and nature conservation begin?
Well, I studied ecology at university, and in my final year, I did a dissertation on hedgerows and old pollards. And I also had a very inspired teacher who took us on a nature conservation journey, kind of like we've done over these last 10 days, visiting sites and meeting landowners and talking about how nature conservation works. And that was a real inspiration for me.
What drew you to specialize in the conservation and restoration of ancient trees?
Well, I think it was the work of Oliver Rackham, who is a historian in England, who wrote some fantastic works about old trees and wood pastures and the history of them. And where I went to university was where he worked. And the dissertation I did with hedgerows and old pollards, I kind of got really interested in that aspect. The trees were managed and they were working trees. And then when I finished university, I got a job at Burnham Beeches working with Reid. And I can still remember, it was 1992, so it's more than 30 years ago. The first day at work was in October, and it was raining orange and red beech leaves. And I just thought, this is what I want to do. And there are lots of old beech pollards at Burnham Beeches. So there's about 400. It's a nature reserve in the west of London.
Reid comes to you as kind of mentor, or?
Yeah, absolutely. That was how we met. She was working there and I worked there as an assistant to her for a year, just a year contract. And I guess we discovered our shared love of old pollards.
In your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges in ancient tree care at this moment?
If I'm really honest, I think it's risk. Our fear of risk, our fear of safety. I think we have totally misunderstood the actual risk. We drive our cars to the trees and we're more likely to die in the car on the way to the tree than we are from the tree dropping a branch. And old trees often have the very features that people are afraid of. And I think that's probably still one of the biggest challenges that face our old trees.
How does the approach to veteran trees differ between the UK and Sweden, given you have worked in both places?
I think I've seen a change over the 20 years that I've worked in Sweden, but one of the things for sure that was different is there's a much stronger focus on forestry in Sweden compared with the UK, where there's more of a tree focus, I suppose. But I think there's a change, and arboriculture as an industry wasn't as well developed 20 years ago as I think it is now. Individual trees maybe were more valued in the UK compared with Sweden. That's one of the big differences. But then the other difference here is that the state is the main person or the main organisation involved in nature conservation. So in the UK, there are lots of NGOs involved in nature conservation, which it has a big impact on how trees and nature conservation generally is managed. Because with NGOs, you have a much greater variety of organisations and also, in a way, more innovation because of that. And also longer term thinking. There's no political influence, whereas in Sweden it's the state that manages the nature reserves, so you still have political changes that impact. But the positives is that new ideas move very quickly through the organisations in Sweden, whereas it takes a long time for new ideas to move in nature conservation primarily. And there are very big NGOs like the National Trust. They own 250,000 hectares of land. So it's a huge organisation. It's as big or if not bigger than some of the national agencies in Sweden. So there are people who are professionals in nature conservation but also in managing old buildings. But the money to pay comes from membership of private individuals or car parking charges. So the money comes from a non-political source, I suppose, which means that it's maybe a more reliable income, which means that you might be able to plan longer ahead in the future, 100 years ahead. And when you think about old trees, we have to be planning for the longer term. But there are also small NGOs like, like the Ancient Tree Forum, actually, the organisation that I'm involved in. That's a tiny organisation.
So is there a difference also how people in the UK and in Sweden think about the veteran trees, old trees?
I think that's a difficult one to answer. I think because obviously I see people and speak to people who are interested.
Okay.
So it's hard to judge. One of the things that I notice, if you like, the general public in Sweden, there's open access. So a lot of people are used to being out in the countryside, whereas in England that's not the case. So people have, I think, not such a close relationship with the countryside. It's more like Scotland, my home country, where there is open access as well, that people have a closer relationship. So that's one of the things that I think influences how people's relationships with old trees, but in nature conservation generally. And that's a difference for sure.
So you have produced not only a variety of scientific articles, but practical materials as well, from management plans to guided walks and training materials. Which kind of work has been the most rewarding for you and why?
I think that's also a difficult question, because the scientific papers, the work behind that is always really interesting, and it takes time, and you often have the opportunity to follow a subject or a topic over time. But I do probably enjoy training more than anything else. I love having people who are curious with me in a classroom and out in the field, and work with them and do exercises so that they open their eyes to how old trees, the fascinating ecology. I love that most of all, I think. And that was VetTree was the training aspect, and we took that even in the VetCert project as well. And I think training people is so important, because even if people don't take the certification that we have with VetCert, if they can still learn more about why these trees are so precious to us, from the biodiversity they support, but also their heritage that they are a part of, I think, then to me that feels better.
Could you tell us about your role as a board member of the Ancient Tree Forum in the UK and its objectives?
I've been involved in the Ancient Tree Forum since it started, and that was with a good friend of mine, Ted Green, that certainly many people working in the tree world will recognise. And then we formed as a charity about 20 years ago, and I've been a trustee since then. And the objectives of the Ancient Tree Forum is to raise awareness of the value of our ancient trees, and also to manage them properly. So I think our focus as well is on the professional world. So it's not about raising awareness amongst the general public. It's about the arboricultural industry, nature conservation industry, forestry, landowners, and trying to provide them with knowledge and information and expertise so that they can manage their trees better and that they'll live longer. That's really the core of what the organisation wants.
So can you share a particular ancient tree that left a profound impact on during your work?
I think it's hard to say one tree, Joseph, because I've been lucky enough to work at sites with populations of old trees. But I would have to say, if I had to choose, there is a hornbeam, a Carpinus pollard at Hatfield Forest, where I worked for 6 or 7 years. And I think the natural processes and the way the trees want to survive, those one hornbeam in particular, but lots of the hornbeams at Hatfield Forest, they were mismanaged and they survived, and they produce shoots and they decay and they fall over and they recycle themselves and they move, they layer. I think for me that was a real eye-opener as to all trees have these natural processes that we don't always think about, and that we should work with them, because these are what evolution has developed over millions of years, and that So that's really, for me, is what I think about. If I'm thinking about one in particular, would be one of the hornbeams at Hatfield Forest.
How do you envision the future of veterinary tree care, and what role do you see yourself playing in it?
I feel confident that we are raising awareness, and I've seen a change over the last 2 or 3 decades since I started working, and I really hope that continues. I hope as well that we can begin to have a greater perspective over how valuable these trees are and that we need to look after them, and also secure a generation of ancient trees for the future. And in terms of my role, I hope that I can continue to train people and to share knowledge and to learn more, as I always do, from every opportunity, as we have over these last 10 days. You know, just standing under a tree with someone, you have a conversation that makes you think differently about something, like we did about the tree with the crack today, you know. And I think that that's where I hope my role will continue, that I'll continue to learn from colleagues and share that knowledge with others to secure the future of more of our old trees.
What advice would you give to young ecologists, arborists looking to contribute to veterinary tree care?
I would say go along to Ancient Tree Forum field visits, spend time with people who've been working with old trees, because that's the best way to learn. Whether that's as a volunteer or whether that's in your job, I think that would be the best advice. That's what I've learned absolutely the most from, has spending time with people out in the field, groups of people as well with different knowledge. Like we have these last few days as well. We've got people who are specialists in beetles, and others that are specialists in fungi, and others that are tree professionals. And having that mix means that you always learn something new. I think finally, I would add that strive towards, if you want to work with veteran trees, strive towards VetCert as well. Whether you take the certification or whether you just go on a training course, that would be a really good tip, particularly a few years down the line in your career as well, if that's really what makes you, makes you burn.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you too.